So a very warm welcome to everyone who's attending this evening, whether you're a member or a supporter of Christian Engineers and Development, or maybe you have no prior connection to CED and have heard about this through some other channel. Whatever the case, you're all very welcome. My name, as I said before, is Mike Beresford. I'm one of the directors for CED. This is the first of our CED Tech Talks. Now, these talks came about after CED finalised our strategic plan. Bear with me if I suddenly see somebody popping up. But the talks came about after we finalised our strategic plan. One of our priorities was to focus on knowledge and skills. And this has two aspects. Firstly, we want to increase our own level of understanding about development technology. And secondly, we wish to share what we know, the knowledge we have, with others in our field of work. In a minute, I'll hand over to Ian Rankin, who's going to speak about pumpkin tanks for rainwater harvesting. Ian is a self-employed architect, and he said that he's a property manager as well, which sounds most grand. He became a member of CED back in 1993. That's almost before I was born. And he became a director in 2004 and then chair in 2010. And I took over from Ian, I can't remember exactly when, but around 2015 as chair. And I'm no longer chair, and Jonathan thankfully is now, Jonathan Appleby. Now, because of his background, Ian is the natural target when a building related project comes up. But over the years, his interest, sorry, I've just had something. In a minute, I'll go to that question. Over the years, his interest in training and particularly rainwater tank construction has increased. And we're delighted that he's going to be speaking to us now about this subject. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to him. What I did forget to do was highlight my own screen. So I'm going to first of all spotlight Ian's screen for everybody, and then hopefully he's going to be able to share his screen. And if you can't, let me just adjust that. There we are. You should be able to share your screen now.
Right, yeah, the little green light is at the bottom. Well, hi everybody. I hope you're still happy to listen to me by the time I have finished. But anyway, thank you for your introduction, Mike. I think there are few enough of us. I think we might get away with, if I start to get too imaginative in what I'm saying and I need corrected or whatever, or somebody would like some development of some aspects of what I talk about. I think if you wave a hand or just interrupt, Mike, would you be able to give them the microphone if we pause at that stage?
Yeah, they can open the microphone themselves anyway. They can unmute themselves.
All right, yeah.
So you're happy to have questions as we go along?
I think so, yeah, because I think I tend to be fairly informal, and also I tend to, I'm not relaxed public speaking, so therefore it will be basically a script I'm reading, so it might give some light relief from that if it gets a bit boring. But hopefully, I mean, Ferrocement tanks are wonderful things, and hopefully that we will have good fun together. Right, I need to remember how to, first of all, get my screen to share. One moment. Yeah, I think possibly. Right, so you're all seeing my initial slide, yeah? I hope. Gosh, you're all muted, so you can't answer.
Yes,
yes.
We can see it. Thank you very much. On to the second screen now.
Yeah, right. So this is, so hope you enjoy this evening. I've been messing around with tanks for a long time. And just now is a very good time to be involved with Ferrocement, and particularly for rainwater tanks. And just right at this moment, we have a workshop going in Tanzania that is being run by people from Kagera, 1,000 kilometers away from the people that are training in Pande. But I trained the people in Kagera, and they are very able people because they've get a lot of training from Tier Fund as well. And Leonard is a university graduate in community development and so on. So we've got a good team training another team who is very enthusiastic, and it looks like everybody is happy and things are going well. The demand for rainwater harvesting just now is in part driven by the Sustainable Development Goals. That these include obviously clean water, and the clean water includes rainwater harvesting. So African governments get brownie points for doing rainwater harvesting programs. So there is more interest than there was for a long time. But it is only a partial solution that usually, particularly in Africa, you've got dry seasons and so on, and it's not the whole thing. But I think we do need to remember that most solutions to water, clean water, they're iterative. It's sometimes you go to a village and they've got no water. Well, they can't have no water at all, because if they had no water, they wouldn't be living there. So what we're doing is adding to something that's already there and making life just that bit better. And I thought I would approach the talk by looking first of all at the materials that go into ferrocement. So first of all, we've got the chicken wire that was invented by Charles Bernard way back in the 1840s. So it's a thin, flexible, galvanized wire. It goes straight, the wire goes through a machine that kind of tangles it together. And once it's galvanized, that helps to bond it to the cement, and also stops it corroding quite so fast when it's near the shell surface of a tank. One of the things that we've been finding on our projects is just now it's very hard to get anything other than Chinese wire in East Africa. So what you usually buy, it's a 1-inch hole, and it's very thin wire that they use. And the next ingredient is sand, and I think, again, I'm hoping that you're all, as you go through your lives as engineers, you're gradually getting more savvy with sand. First, ferrocement, we do want quite good quality sand because it is a very thin, it's a thin walled structure that we're making. So you like it nice and clean without clay, because that absorbs all the cement, takes it out of the rest of the mix, and of a nice mixed size that of river sand is ideal. So quite often we would put it through a sieve to get out the big lumps. And when I do the training course, we put some of the sand in a bottle and shake it up and then watch all the clay settle on the top of it. The next bit is the water. So as I say, if you don't have water, you don't have life. And in many ways, if you can't drink the water you're using to make the cement, then it's possibly not the best water for cement, because anything that's kind of salt, any chemicals and dirt, they weaken the mix. Another thing about water is that I always forget to add it in as a project cost if I'm trying to price a project in Africa, because the water costs can be quite substantial just in an ordinary building project. This is maybe one that we can discuss. The waterproofing additive, I was surprised how readily available it has become. That when we started out last year doing these courses, all the shops have this stuff. But my understanding is it's basically a plasticizer, so that you don't need so much water, so the cement gets nice and dense when it dries. But some of the books are suggesting you use plasticizer in the final slurry coat. I don't know if anybody has experience of that. In Tanzania, I've been using it just in the first coat inside the tank, just to give some help to it. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Mike, talk to me. Right, I'll keep moving.
Sorry, Ian, basically most of these cement additives go in so you don't need to use so much water to provide the same workability.
Yeah.
And by reducing your excess water in your cement, you're reducing the air voids within the hardened cement or concrete, and therefore there's less interstices for the water to percolate through the concrete or cement.
Yeah, but that's not going to make any difference if you've got a very thin slurry. You're just kind of splashing on as a final coat. I wouldn't have thought.
Well, you can, if you add the plasticizer on it, you don't need so much water to get the same consistency. And therefore, when the cement dries out, you don't leave so many air pockets within the cement. And therefore, the dried out cement isn't so porous.
Yeah, so even in a very thin skin, it still makes a difference, you reckon?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, right. And you don't think it's full of nasty chemicals that are going to poison the people that drink the water? No.
I should think not.
Okay, good. I'll try to worry less.
Can I? This is Neil Cullen here. Can I say anything?
Sure.
Yes, go ahead.
But you just...
Yeah, I'm just chuckling because I learned on site that if you didn't have plasticizer, you could use fairy liquid. And if I'm at home and I want some plasticizer to keep the water down, I just use fairy liquid. Any comments?
Some people frown on it and other people don't. That it does seem to be a good plasticizer, but I think the purists frown on it a bit, that they don't really like it.
Not really a good idea.
Right, purists. Okay, we'll go on to the steel skeleton framework. And one of the nice things about working in Africa is that if you need something, it mysteriously arrives the next day. When we were right in the western border of Rwanda and needed steel, the welder phones Kigali and it comes in the bus overnight. I think they're just great the way they do logistics. But I'm also amazed at some of the specifications, because in Rwanda, if you ask for 6mm steel wire and put a measuring tape against it, it's only actually 4mm thick. And it's not even consistent, because in Tanzania, the 6mm was 4mm, but the 12mm was made in Tanzania and it was a proper 12mm. And then when we measured the steel as well, some of the lengths, people suspect that along the way, people saw the ends off some of these, and the 12-meter lengths were only about 10 or 11 meters long. And the photo at the bottom of it, do you see my little arrow moving as well? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
right.
We can, Ian.
That photo, that is, we couldn't get the 3x40mm size that we wanted, so we just welded 2 bits of wire together, and that worked fine. So you can be quite creative with a practical action list of materials, which I found quite encouraging. Oh, there we go. That's my arrow. Right, now we get to the ferrocement, and it goes way back to 1848 when Joseph Louis Lambeau made his boat with it in Paris. And they hadn't even worked out what proper Portland cement was by then. So I'm just quite amused that it goes back way beyond the reinforced concrete, when I tend to think of it as a kind of a sophisticated modern material. And people still build yachts out of this stuff, that it is a good material for making things that are pliable. They just need to watch out that you don't, apparently boats, when they hit the jetty or whatever, if they're not well reinforced, then they do tend to crush and crumble and break, as this tank did in Rwanda. So the basic for ferrocement is that you've got a nice thick mesh that provides a circle that you can plaster, and you don't really need anything else. And it makes it something very strong. Because I think everybody here is engineers, we all understand that if you have the steel in the middle and the cement outside, or sorry, the cement is nice and strong in compression, but it doesn't do tension very well, and it does tend to break if you try and bend it. So the steel, which is opposite and more elastic, can hold everything together. And we think the tank in Rwanda failed just because the cement was very green and it hadn't really bonded to the substrate for some reason. But one morning they came to their tank and that's how it looked. But we've had very few collapses of tanks, considering the number that have been made, particularly in Mayangi, where Alan's been working. Right, so that is what you need. That's the bits of a tank. So tank design has evolved over the years too, obviously. We've had water storage for a very long time. Joseph's brother stuck him in a tank in around 2000 BC, and I can't remember whether that was the Bronze Age or the end of the Stone Age where he was, but I think in Egypt it was this Bronze Age. So, I mean, we have been storing water a long time, and there are an awful lot of choices. We've got the proper reinforced concrete tank, which is very good, very solid, can be repaired easy, but it is awful expensive. And we built one in Rwanda that I reckon we could have built a ferrocement tank for a fraction of the cost, but at that stage, I think the Rwandan people would have been a bit nervous of the different material, and we ourselves were a bit nervous because we didn't really have the experience of using it. And this is a blockwork tank with steel reinforcement in the joints that Rob did in Pawaga. I think that's right, Rob. Yeah, nod your head and then I will know. Yeah. And it was John Holloway that just died a couple of years ago. He designed these tanks when he was working for the Tanzanian government way back in the, I think, 1960s. So they're all over the place now. So it's kind of proto-CED influence. How's that? The most common kind of tank is the plastic tank in Africa. And they're reasonably inexpensive, and they are nice and easy to install, and they're nice and light, so you can put them up on top of a platform very easily. But if you don't do it properly, then they can fail, and if they fail, they have failed, they ain't going to be repaired. And this is just a little list. I mean, I think we see the ferrocement tank as a competitor to the plastic tank and hope that it can replace it in some instances. And it is just that you need access for a big vehicle to get the plastic tank in, and all the profit goes to the big shareholders in the city instead of the nice little storekeepers in the village. So there are issues. And also cement lasts forever. Watt in his book reckons kind of well over 50 years, but I mean, the Romans were building with cement and we still got it. So if these tanks are only used for storing water, then arguably they shouldn't deteriorate at all. The last kind of different, unusual type of tank I want to talk about is the Banga Pinoy, which done in the early 2000s. And the interesting thing is it uses just ordinary wire wound around a form instead of the chicken mesh. Because the chicken mesh is horribly expensive, or not horribly, but it is quite a big chunk of the project cost. So if you can use just ordinary wire and wind it around some extra times, then arguably you get a better value for money. But the people doing the Banga Pinoy, they were very keen on accuracy. And so they weld up this big steel cage made out of rebars and then saw it up again, which is great. You get a very accurate form. But I think particularly again in Mayangi, we've discovered it doesn't really matter too much at all how accurate it is. At the end of the day, you still get a tank. It just might be a bit smaller if the walls are a bit wobblier than they should be.
Ian?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Because we're talking reinforcement and something crosses my mind. Has there ever been any consideration of alternatives to steel for reinforcement? I believe there have been experiments with plant fibers for reinforcement and bamboo.
There have in the unreinforced tanks, but it's never really caught on. I mean, I think my big thing, and I come on to that, is that at the end of the day, we're not building huge tanks, and it's difficult to see what whether the reinforcement is really needed anyway. That, and once these tanks are up, they are pretty strong, and as long as the tap area and just the stress areas maybe around the lid have a bit extra support, there doesn't seem to be an awful lot of need for all the chicken wire in the first place. That is a personal opinion, and we can maybe discuss later. But yes, it's a good point.
Okay.
Cohen again, just picking up on that, what you're going to use for reinforcement. To me, well, the first thing is you need the tensile strength. You will need some tensile strength. But secondly, it's the bonding. And one of the things about steel is that it rusts, and therefore it gives you a nice rough bond. If you were going to use a bamboo, I suspect the cement wouldn't bond to the bamboo.
Yeah, but in fine fibers, they reckon that it does, all little particles do gather around the bamboo, and so it does make it more rigid, even because the argument is that the bamboo eventually can rot away as well. Then it would be fun to try one of these, something like that sometime. Because in Tanzania, they are doing a lot. They are talking about pushing to grow more bamboo because it just grows so quickly there. So it's an available material, and it would certainly be cheaper than. Yeah, we should do that next time. Well, maybe see what we can try.
Ian, in the 70s, this is Stephen Burgess, I was making tanks using the traditional grain baskets as the formwork. And so that was made of sticks. And so you plaster the inside and outside of the traditional grain basket. And yeah, there's not a question of longevity, you know, beyond 10 years, but some were still standing after 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I guess I worry that when you've got something substantial that's going to rot away, that it does leave big holes. But yeah, because I have seen tanks like that, and yeah, I mean, I guess there's just so many choices that we've got, and I mean, there's underground tanks that I've really not explored yet, and I guess I'm a little bit frightened of them. You can make your reasons for not doing it, like it's hard to find the leaks and so on, but at the end of the day, they must have a place, and they do keep the water nice and cool.
Ian?
Yep.
We used to have underground water tanks in Ivory Coast.
Mm-hmm.
They were built in underneath the actual buildings. So it kept it nice and cool and fresh. It was just a regular cleaning out was a little bit more of an issue. But we had no problems.
Yeah.
And we had them there when I was a student. And then when I went back as a member of staff, 15 years later, they were still being used and there was no issues.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe I'm making excuses for just, I don't want to face up to doing something new and challenging.
It was a lot of work digging it, but then if you were digging the foundations, then that was, and something else just crossed my mind there. You were saying they were using alternative material. I wonder whether something like coconut husk, which could be actually woven and produce a matting, which you could then bond both sides. Now, if it's sealed inside it, I can't see why or how long it would take before it actually rots. Steel rusts, and the rust actually then expands, and it causes the cement to actually crack and pop, which is something which I've seen if it's not been treated properly and maybe even primed. But I wonder if something like coconut husk, which is it's a wasted material in many places, but it's available.
I mean, I guess it's how we put some of these ideas into action, because they all have their benefits and problems. And I guess at the moment, using the chicken wire, it's a proven technology. We don't need to prove anything to anybody. And one of the SB Watt's Ferrocement water tanks published in 1978 still seems to be quite relevant today. I guess just because nobody has really found that coconuts or whatever have really solved something that isn't already solved. Although it'd be nice if they did, because arguably it should be less expensive and easier to get your hands on the material. But I quite like Watts pointing out that we're really doing wire reinforced mortar rather than ferrocement, because there isn't nearly so much wire in a ferrocement water tank as there is in a boat. And he goes through different methodologies in his book. The first thing you do, as we've been talking about, is when we get the tank mold, you need a surface to plaster. So whether it's a coconut mat, which might be quite good fun to try, or corrugated steel, but that tends to be quite clumsy. When CED did the tanks in Uganda, we used 50mm weld mesh, which it was easily available. It does the job. Another way of doing things is to go to the unreinforced tanks, which generally are smaller, and I guess that's where the granary baskets and so on would come in. And I did this one around 1990. Just, you sew the sacks together. Again, it's straight out of the SB Watt book. You sew the sacks together, you fill them with sawdust, and then you plaster the outside. So this was my solution to an upscaling of the tanks in Thailand. And again, one of the fascinating things that I seem to see is that in Asia, they do things very small and neat. And in Africa, they just love upscaling everything. And they don't, people in Africa somehow, they don't blink an eye about making a 4 cubic meter tank, or at least a 1 cubic meter tank that should just have been 1/4 of a cubic meter. They just go on and do it. And it does make it fun to be able to experiment with things. This slide is my double curve explanation. I think everybody has this idea that as you get to the bottom of the tank, you've got a lot more pressure because there's a lot more depth. And then that joint between the vertical wall and the horizontal plane, there is going to be lots of extra stress. And that is just a summary. So if we can do a tank with a double curve, it gets stronger, so it uses less material. And I can't read the last bit because I have your pictures over it, but you know where we're getting. Now, this next part of the talk is what we have done in CED. So this is our project in Uganda in the 1990s. They were very well appreciated, but in many ways, it's not even the technical issues that are the issue with ferrocement tanks. It is just getting people to make the decision to spend a serious amount of money for them to have a tank. And when the CED subsidy ran out, then work petered to a halt. But I mean, 20 years on, and we do have people in Africa generally are that bit wealthier, although still terribly poor. So there is a better chance of it now, and with a bit push from governments as well to promote rainwater harvesting, you hope that there can be a bit more building. And at the bottom line for us is that we are teaching new skills to people and creating jobs where there wasn't work before. So, and it can bring groups, particularly of women, out of poverty. A more recent project, this was in 2006. I went to do some training with child-headed households in Rwanda with some genocide orphans, and we built these tanks that were kind of 11 or 1200 liters. And again, we used sawdust. But again, when the project ended, there was no real interest to kind of follow on, and I'm not sure what stage they're at now. But it was very helpful for me. This was one of the prototype tanks that broke, and you can see just how thin the shell can end up being. That's just 2 thicknesses on that. But that, I mean, there's not much more than that on some of the 1000 liter tanks. And Roger Holland and the group from the So I don't know whether Dick can comment whether the tank that you built is still standing in London. I take it is, yeah.
Roger's there as well, by the way.
All
So
right. Hi, Roger.
Hi, Ian.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sure Alan would have let us know if we built 2 tanks. So I'm sure he would have let us know if there'd been any problems with them. So that they were each a cubic meter and built without any, well, with very, very minimal wire in them. So essentially,
why did you put wire in them at all is the $1 million question.
we wanted to reinforce the neck, so we put some wire
But
around.
why? I mean,
Because we're engineers.
Aha.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question.
Yeah.
We also,
It's just my observation is that somehow the thing seems to stay up, and it's knowing whether it's a wire that's keeping it up or whether it is just blind faith. It's just difficult to know what to trust in.
I think we have this idea that cement-based materials can't take any tension.
Yes, but that's not true.
But it's not true. It can take tension. It's just that it can't take, you know, as much as reinforced material.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes,
if it couldn't take tension, you couldn't pull a brick out of a wall. You'd have to be able to pull a brick out of a wall, wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And certainly it does give you a bit more confidence, and you don't need to use so much cement, arguably, as well. So yeah. So in Rwanda, and towards the end of 2017, Alan had a project lined up in Rwanda to use a local person to do training in rainwater harvesting tanks. And that all fell through. So I put my hand up because it sounded good fun. And we had a rummage around the internet, because I just felt that after people have been building these tanks for the last 30 or 40 years. So it seemed a good idea to try and just see what was available now. And what I came across was the pumpkin tank, and Practical Action is very good with their information in the internet. So they had their technical brief, they had their training module, and I did phone them up, but they couldn't find any drawings anywhere. But there was enough information that I could make up the drawings myself, so that's what I did. But as an excuse me, being an architect, I tended to put too much information on one sheet, and really we do need to, at some stage, try and make it a bit more user friendly. But at least when you look at the CED booklet, you can build a tank from it. There's pretty well all the information you need. And all the information is available on the CED website. So again, I think it is a highly underused facility that we have as an organization, that people are encouraged to rummage through it. And in many ways, if it starts to get used, then we maybe should start to try and work out how to organize it better, because it does take a bit delving. But with modern internet speeds, it is possible to find quite a lot of information on there. Because once you get into it, then that's a list of the things you can, AGM 2019 workshops, if you want reminded of them, all sorts of information about drinking water and so on. And then on the CED Flickr account, we've got all the project albums organized. That if you want information, if you want pictures of a project that we've done, then there's a reasonable chance you'll get it on the Flickr account. It's a Flickr Pro account, so we've got tons of room on it. So if anybody would like to send photos in, I'm happy to upload them. And I think Mike's very keen that we all do this, because certainly it does give us a good resource. If I need something for the newsletter, it'd be great to be able to just go in there and rummage things instead of looking at my own holiday snaps, which I feel I do.
Absolutely.
Sorry?
Absolutely.
Yay. You don't like my holiday snaps?
I love your holiday snaps.
Good. Right. Well, so having got the information, we have now been building, we have now got 4 courses under our belt, and the group that I was talking about earlier are working away. We did 2 courses in Rwanda, first with Alan in Mayangi, and then with Rob Hoy in Changugu. And after that, I did 2 courses in Tanzania, one with my old pal who was a Bible student in Glasgow for a few years. So we did one with his church, and then one with the Anglicans up at Ngara, which I think Barbara put us in touch with them. But I mean, the courses always run very well, and the current one's going very well as well. Everybody just enjoys doing it. And it's not a huge investment for CED. For the current course, CED is paying 920, which gets our trainers right across the country, including hotel bills, which, although I was told they'll probably just sleep in the bus anyway. So I think the trainers do reasonably well out of it, and they certainly get their entertainment. And the recipient group, who are supported by by Hope Story in Canada, they're paying £2,000, which is basically for all the tools and the materials and feeding everybody for 2 weeks. And that's a picture taken just last Friday, showing the tank. It's actually straighter than the ones that I've supervised, so they're doing very well. The next part of the talk is to look at how things develop on site. I thought the easiest way to consider the details of the tank would be just to walk through the steps of building one, just so that we can look together about how they go together. So the first day basically is throwing everything together and building the plinth. And nobody likes that first day because it's very heavy lifting and there's very little to show at the end of it. One of the things we did was we used blocks for the foundations in Kibaha, because bringing in rocks by a truck wasn't going to be very economic because we only needed a few. And the other thing is that the outlet pipe goes into this sub base so that it's nice and strong and not going to break off on the thin cement wall. And one of the things that puzzles me is that quite often, looking at literature, people are using quite big pipes for the outlet pipe and then still putting them into a 3/4 inch tap. I've just been using a 3/4 inch tap on a 3/4 inch pipe, and as far as I can see, that does the job. So after we've laid that base, we make the base of the tank itself. So you make the circle, you plonk some chicken wire down on it. You do something to stop you do something to mark the edges of the circle, whether it's a bit of ceiling board or cement blocks or whatever else. And then you put in the bolts that are going to hold down your temporary formwork and pour the concrete. And at the same time, there's time to do the tank lid. So that's little bolts all round. That's the outlet popping up there. I only use one outlet because the idea is you just unscrew that upstand and then you can do the final bit of washing out when you're cleaning the tank. And then you leave the base to cure for a day. And we do emphasize trying to keep the base wet. I always enjoy watching the skeleton getting built. It is quite challenging, but you do suddenly see what you're going to get at the end, that you put up this kind of rather wobbly skeleton, you put the spiral hoops around it, and by the end of the day, you've got something that somebody can climb about on to do the finishing work. So that's the steel being burnt by local fundis, and it is good. We do try and emphasize that we do want reasonable quality here, because that is what makes the tank to be nice and symmetrical. And then that's the bit I talked about earlier, just the extra welding. But somehow I do see the pumpkin tank as a quite elegant solution, because you've got all these bits of steel. They can go on a motorbike, so they can, arguably you can take them down a bicycle track to somewhere quite remote.
Can I ask a question, Ian?
Sure.
As a sort of former biker, wouldn't you have those the other way up? Because aren't you going to catch those on furrows as you go along? Anyway, I'm only being flippant.
He's maybe actually in the middle of unloading. I'm not quite sure how he did it, but
Anyway,
right,
carry on.
Right, so the innovation that I did with CED tanks was that because it's 1-inch chicken wire and the cement wasn't going to stick to it, we put the plastic sacking behind it to give it something to hold, to give the cement, stop the cement all falling down. And that seems to have been very successful. So that's still going up. And then you put these posts, the timber post in the middle, just to try and give it a bit more rigidity. But there is always a bit movement just right at the bottom of the tank, even once it's all done, until you get the first coat on. It does tend to wobble about a little bit. But you can see that, I mean, the spiral wire, by the time it's used a couple of times, it's got a lot of bumps on it. But as long as you do your best, it actually, it still results in a tank that's quite acceptable. So the first day you fix all the sacking on, you put string on that just to help the cement to stop sliding down the sacking. In the old days, you got jute sacking, but that's difficult to get hold of now. It seems to be only the daga, the small fish, that they use jute sacking for. Everything else is in plastic. And then you fix the 2 layers of mesh. And again, sort of, well, why 2 layers? Why not just 1 layer? And then you also, basically we've been adding binding wire as well, just around and around the tank, because we're saying, well, if it's supposed to be 2 layers of 1/2-inch wire, then 1-inch wire has about 1/4 of the steel in it, so we better try and give it a bit more help. So that's for putting this stuff on with the backing and just making everything so that it is going to work. And with the big benefit that when you take the wire out from the inside, it's against nice clean plastic sheet, and therefore it comes out nice and easily. And that was an interesting one up at the Ngara project, where you make this little hook and you just twist the wire around it, and that holds the 2 layers of wire together, and just it tightens everything up nicely, and it's a lot less footery than lots of bits of tie wire. So the day 5, outside of the tank, you put the first layer. You're supposed to do the second layer the same day, but we've never managed to do that. And then leave it to cure for 2 days. Because it's taken 2 days to put the cement on, we figured, well, the first layers had 2 days, and we've got away with climbing about on the tank after the first layers had the 2 days, and the second layer is just really 1 day. And one of the things that I started using is using batching boxes, and I'm surprised that people actually like using them, because it always in the past seemed a lot of bother, but it's so easy to use, and it's so much more reassuring than the local way of doing things. Is you have 1 bag of cement, 1 wheelbarrow of, or 1 barrow of cement, 1 bag of cement, 3 wheelbarrows of sand, which is actually just a 1-to-6 mix. So if you're doing it in the same box, they know they're getting it right. Because we did that experiment in the Cyangugu in Rwanda, that one day they did try and hurry a little bit, and it all went kind of weak. And also riddling the sand gets the big lumps of clay and stones out of it if the sand isn't great quality. For the pumpkin tank, we've been using a 1-to-3 mix, which seems fairly standard, but in the kind of 1970s and 80s, it was tended to be 1 to 2. I don't, again, just I find it interesting that we are managing with a slightly weaker mix. But this is the bottom of the tank hitting the 2-inch thick slab that goes at the bottom. And you can see that there's quite a lot of dust in there and so on. And it does seem to be a weakness in the tank that you just try and do your best to make a nice coving inside the tank to try and seal that, because some of them have leaked there. And one of the other things is that the tank surface tends to slump sometimes, but we have just kind of plastered over it with the next layer, and it has been okay. So I think we've been very fortunate. That I guess what I am perceiving is that you don't need to really worry too much. There is a lot of redundancy in the strength, and it is good when there are so many variables and so many things that can't be quite right, like the mix and so on. While the tank is curing, you can get on with making the gutters and things. And the gutters, they are an important part of the project, and they're not nearly as much talked about as the tank itself. But I have not managed to find anything that's really much better value for money than just an ordinary PVC gutter, because taking a corrugated sheet and bending it all and hammering it all, they're not really going to last terribly long. And everybody has their own ideas of how best to fix them anyway. One of the things, however, is that I do find a 1 to 60 fall is good for a gutter. Water can get up a decent speed along it, and you know it's going to drain. It doesn't need to look pretty like in the front of your nice bungalow here. It has a job to do. So that's a kind of list of the bits you need. We filter the water that comes off the roof through a bucket filter, just as a preliminary filter before it goes into the tank. And there's a first flush diverter to take away the first little bit of water as well. So that is a finished one. I'm not quite sure we needed the mosquito wire over the end of the pipe, but anyway, we got it, and it goes into that bucket and then down into the tank. Working in Africa, in general, things appear as you need them, and when we needed the ladder, the boys nipped into the forest, knocked down some saplings, and we had a ladder. In Rwanda, they mixed the cement, and then they knew they needed a wood float to put the cement onto the tank, but the cement was getting mixed at the same time as the wood floats were getting built. But the just in time it does work just in time, so it has all been successful. And then that course, the tanks got to cure over the weekend. It's a case of just keeping them damp. So once the tank has dried a bit, you put somebody inside. And the tanks are strong enough that we didn't do the big goalpost effect. We just kind of put a ladder up and were careful, and somebody got inside without the tank breaking and got the skeleton frame out. And once the skeleton frame is out, you start to do the plastering. And there is a health and safety issue here. It gets really roasting hot in there. It's hugely humid because you've got drying cement in the tropical sun. But I mean, everybody gets to and they work away. So this is towards the end, just finishing off everything. And there are a few issues. Just the first flush diverter, I think everybody has the idea that the first water off the roof is going to be dirty, especially if it's not rained for a while. So you want to discard that. In the old days, you just used to point the pipe to one side for the first 10 minutes and then point it over the tank. More recently, people have been experimenting with kind of anti-types, anti-tanks to settlement chambers and so on, but it just makes everything horribly complicated and expensive. For that reason, I quite like this just the length of downpipe as a first flush diverter, but it really doesn't do an awful lot, because if you look at it was during a rain shower just after the gutters were on, so the water was running down the pipe, but instead of running right down the pipe, it all comes out at the branch, because the water tends to go down the outside face of the pipe, and the branch is covering about 25–30% of the circumference of the pipe. So all that's just being encouraged to divert. And so all the dirt's getting washed into the tank anyway. And then down here, people do all sorts of sophisticated plugs, which I felt weren't appropriate, because it means you're having to go somewhere to look for, well, you end up importing plugs, which isn't really sustainable locally. So I was folding over just a bit of ordinary pipe, filling it with cement to make sure it's a good solid plug, and then poking it in through the joint. And that works to an extent, but it's really not very clever, because you can also put a nail through it, and the argument is if there's a bit leakage there, it's no bad thing. It means the first flush diverter the water will drain off slowly, ready for the next shower then. But there is 2 meters of pressure in that. I hadn't quite realized what 2 meters of pressure looked like till I had to work with one that was full. But yeah, there's no way that's going to take more than a few minutes of water off the roof. So I don't know whether it's certainly something we need to keep thinking about. So the following day, you just keep curing, and it's the end of the thing. So you discuss what you have learned, and all the rest of it. And just, I think the wrap up for this is I guess I get quite excited that everybody really enjoys the courses and everyone wants to make them. The downside is that you come back a year later and, well, nothing really has happened despite the enthusiasm. But I think on the day is something tangible that people can see in the modern day, when basically the people are told to think what they can do with the resources they already have and so on, which is very good in development terms, but it's not so much fun. I think that was my understanding from Richard Lister is that's really what he has tried to help people to do, to instead of just feeling like they're victims, they see what they have, and they can start to lift themselves out of poverty just by thinking through what the assets they have and developing these assets. Making a tank is much simpler. It's something very practical and physical, and off you go. So that makes it rewarding as well. You feel you've achieved something, you see the tank. And everybody likes them. In Rwanda, some students were walking by and they told me they thought that we were making an art installation that looked so nice. And I think the curves they do chime with kind of African traditional structures like the grain stores and so on you see in old pictures. So, I mean, they are more affordable and less expensive than plastic tanks, and they do last longer. The materials are available locally, and local work keeps jobs and therefore money in the local economy. I don't know, do people have any questions they want to ask? Because here are some of mine. I don't know whether Mike just wants to unmute everybody and have a free-for-all, or perhaps people can. Oh, Angus has waved his hand.
I was going to suggest, why don't you just run us through those questions, and then we'll go on to Angus's and any other people's questions. People can unmute themselves, but once you've gone through those, then you can stop sharing your screen, and then we can see everybody.
Right. I mean, the first one is the one I've been hinting at all along, I guess. I'm not an engineer, so I have a good excuse, but I am, because at the moment, my take is that the Romans built stuff and it's still standing, therefore it is okay. If I build a tank and it's standing a year later, then it's okay, because it has stood and the cement only gets stronger with time. So the fact that I don't have my calculations doesn't worry me too much, as long as we're happy that the odd tank is going to fail. But I guess coming from that is I'd love to be able to do something cleverer with less material if that were possible. Then there's the first flush diverter thing that we have been thinking about as well. And also just how we persuade people who are basically poor, they really need a mobile phone before they need a water tank, because it's the women who carry the water and it's the men that have the mobile phones. Okay, so I'll stop the share now and we can see each other. Right.
Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, you're still here. This is great.
So I think Angus had a question. Then do you want to go ahead, Angus? And then I think Ian's put one on the chat, which I'll read out in a minute. But Angus, if you want to go first.
Picking up on what Ian said there, we could run structural analysis on a tank, and that would be an interesting thing to do. But it strikes me that if you are building them and getting an occasional failure, then you're pretty close to where you should be.
Right,
if you've absolutely got no failures, then, well, maybe there's savings to be made. And if they all failed, it'd have to be heavier. But you're just in that sweet spot. The question I suppose I'd ask you, Ian, is are the failures due to some sort of failure in construction, or just because we're too close to the margin?
I think basically the failures really have been leaks, and they have all been solved just by adding a little more cement. That I don't think we've had structural failures apart from that one that just collapsed overnight for mysterious reasons.
I'll add it to the long list of things that I'd like to do.
Yeah.
I've got the appropriate software. And the question I was going to ask was, so you go along to these training events and you see all sorts of wonderful, clever stuff, and you go away full of enthusiasm, but can you remember what it was you were supposed to do? Do you send people away with a little handbook?
We have produced a handbook. We have translated it into Swahili. My concern is actually, to be fair, half the class, maybe half the class is pretty literate and used to these things, because they all bring their notebooks as well to the classes. I guess in my head, I'm thinking these are people who are not educated, which is probably incorrect. That yes, we should emphasize more.
Pictures are good.
I will check at the end of this course we're doing that they will get something away. We do buy them a little plastic folder and a tape measure, because a tape measure is only about 50 pence locally. And it gives them something to take away. So they get a little plastic folder, and they get the set of drawings, but it's whether they're able to make a lot of sense out of them because they're so dense.
So thank you. We had a question from Steve. I'll ask it, seeing as you put it on chat. The question to you, Ian, was what is a typical storage volume and cost in dollars?
Can we do it in pounds?
You can do it in pounds, and then we can
kind of 4,000 or 5,000. Can I share my screen again? Because I do have the. I do have
share your screen again, hopefully.
Oh, jinx.
Just down the bottom. That's it.
Right, just it's a touch sensitive one. Right, that is a cost. It's sad that it's in Tanzanian shillings, which maybe isn't the cleverest for discussion just now. But if you remember, 3,000 Tanzanian shillings to the pound, pretty well bang on at the moment. So the first thing everyone forgets is that there is a plinth to be built. So that's the first kind of £55 before you start. Then the next bit is the tank itself, which is 313. Sorry, £130 for the tank, and then the pipework and gutters are the same again.
Is that right?
You're talking about £360 plus labour for a tank with basic guttering. That's the little bit in between.
For 5 cubic meters.
For a 5 cubic meter tank, yeah.
And do you know how that compares to a plastic tank?
It is significantly cheaper, by about 20%. 10–20% cheaper, so it's not half the price.
6
But for
pence a
plastic
litre.
tank, you still have this first bit and you still have the last bit, that it's only the middle bit that you're changing.
6 pence per litre.
Right, that sounds very good value to me. But it's a chicken wet mesh is 22% of the cost of the tank if you take it as roughly 90,000 Tanzania shillings for your chicken mesh, and out of the 407. So it's 22% of the cost of the tank. But of course, by the time you consider the plinth and the pipework and everything of the whole project, is near 10%. So it's not huge, but it is still a significant cost. And anything that we can do to bring the cost of a tank down, I think, would be good. So should I stop sharing the screen? Because I guess people will be able to look at this, and I've got endless little tables on it if somebody does get enthusiastic about it, but hopefully this gives the basics, and Mike will be posting it after the talk.
Yes, yeah, I will. So I suppose one question I have is, so why, if they're cheaper than plastic tanks, what are the constraints that are stopping them being more widely implemented?
The plastic tanks industry has good publicity from all the shops and so on, and it's what people are used to. But I mean, everywhere you go in Africa, you find Ferrocement tank prototypes just wherever you go. I mean, they have been around so long, and nobody has managed really to turn the prototypes into something that's useful. And there is a question about why. Yeah.
I mean, I wonder whether one of the issues, as you say, is a plastic tank can easily be put up on a stand,
Yeah.
where Ferrocement is harder to do that, and whether, you know, Ferrocement is great if you're filling up a jerry can, but it's not great if you want it, you know, to feed taps in your house.
That would, yeah, we've not tried to build any at elevation yet, and yes, that would be a challenge. But not many people, yeah, I guess that, yeah, maybe that is the problem, that it's the rich people who can afford a tank at all, and therefore they're the ones with taps in their houses. That might, yeah, that maybe is part of the problem.
I was going to add to that I was building tanks in Africa before plastic tanks were around, and when they came in, first of all, it's just the ease with which you can go and buy a tank and install it. It's much quicker, and even up to, you know, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000. I've installed tanks of 30,000 plastic tanks, but you know, it's just the speed with which you can do it. So if you're considering labor cost, particularly, it can be cost effective. But in terms of community development and building capacity of the local community, people building their own tanks has an advantage as well. It's a social cost as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. We've got another question from Stephen asking, what is the monthly wage there in Tanzania? Are you able to answer that, Ian?
If you hold on, if we go on to a different one, I will try and find my little table. So if maybe someone asks another question, just because it takes me 5 minutes to find stuff on my computer.
By all means, feel free to ask another question. I've got more in my head if nobody has any questions.
Well,
I was just going to follow on with that. I was asking about the monthly wage because then I was looking to see how much, you know, because you asked the question of why certain people didn't take it on. Why didn't they go on to do that? And I wondered if there was an issue with the cost of labor and getting that tank. And what the previous person had said was, yes, in Africa and the same in India, getting a plastic tank is it's so easy. You get the tank there. And and they do last. You know, if you bury it in the ground, the plastic tank almost lasts indefinitely because of no UV light as well, and it keeps it cool. So it's a quick way. I wish people just want things.
Yeah, and I guess the people who are wealthy enough to get a tank, there is a gap, I think, between the poor people who can't have anything, and then suddenly people have money, but they have enough money, they can go on and do things. And perhaps the Ferrocement is falling a little bit into that. But just at the moment, the Ferrocement does seem to be better value than the plastic at all sorts of level. And somehow, if we could get a little group set up and running and able to supply these, you hope that they would get enough. And you hope that in a town situation, they might start to get enough business that it become profitable for them. But yeah, it is challenging. And although we love the community benefit, you can accept that kind of local middle income people are more interested in getting water in their house. Yeah.
Ian, could I just ask, what kind of wall thickness are you talking about? If you're putting 2 layers of chicken wire, how thick is the cement sand mix?
It's kind of around 50, it's around 50 millimeters. Arguably, you're putting 2 15 millimeters layers outside and then 1 15 millimeter layer inside plus the cement slurry.
Thanks.
The cost that a Pande in Tanzania last year was earning, that's somebody, a tradesman got 15,000 shillings a day. That's a £5 a day. And a day labourer got 8,000. So a day, so kind of £2.50 a day, you can get a labourer. And that does just make so many labour intensive things. I mean, it's crazily inexpensive compared to here to get that done. But again, there is just this, there are huge gaps, or there are huge jumps once you start to get into people who have if they have a minimum living wage, then I suspect it's the Funde wage rather than the day labourer wage, because a meal in a restaurant will cost you 12,000 shillings very, in fact, cost you more than the 15,000 very easily.
We've got another question, Ian, on the chat from John Knight. Do you recommend that all Ferrocement tanks should now switch to the pumpkin design? Are they much more difficult to build compared to, say, a simple cylindrical tank?
Yeah, I think they are ahead, and I haven't actually been I've not been directly responsible for cylindrical tanks, so I'm less sure, but just the sheer enthusiasm people have for pumpkin tanks, I don't think can be as much for cylindrical tanks. And they are relatively easy. Once you've got that, once you've made that shape of the steel, then it's all pretty plain sailing just to make the tank around it.
I think we've probably got time for maybe just one more question. If anyone else has got a question. One from Edwards. I think that we'll take that as our last question before we close. What's been the impact of the tanks built on alleviating poverty and towards the Sustainable Development Goals?
This is what we discussed this at the board, because somebody pointed out that, well, the poor can't afford a tank anyway, so there is no benefit to the very poor. The slightly poor, there is a benefit to, in the sense that the people building the tanks will probably be people who would be otherwise unemployed. So you are helping people up the out of poverty ladder a bit. But I think we're so small scale that we're certainly not making a noticeable difference at district level, maybe in the local village, we could make a difference.
What would be the possible impact if you upscale the project to a more greater size? What would be the follow-on impacts? Like you mentioned, an example of where women could be involved in helping build the tanks and helping them work their way out of poverty that way.
Yeah, if you upscale it, then yes, you have something that could be quite promising.
Okay.
I think what I was going to say, Edward, is the size of the tanks and the cost of them is something that's prohibitive for a normal household. And one of the things that Roger's been working on, the reason for making the smaller tanks, was to see if there was a way to make something that's more affordable available at household level. So we've been looking, we've actually been looking at the idea of working with a rotating loans and savings, or savings and loans groups, to try to make, to sort of connect the two, so that there's a way of making a rainwater harvesting jar, a smaller one, say a cubic meter or thereabouts, available for poorer households. And that's work that's going on at the moment.
Yeah, and the nice thing about the smaller tank is that you can save up for one, and then once you've got it, save up for the next, that it's not a big outlay all at once. And then once you have one at each corner of your house, that's you got the equivalent of your, or the same as your 4,000 litre tank. So it is a useful way to explore.
Sounds interesting.
So, well, may I just, I'm going to try and spotlight myself now. So sorry to unspotlight you, Ian. Just a big thank you to Ian for the time that you've put into preparing that presentation, and for just sharing everything with us tonight. We've really appreciated that. Just to say that if you're not a member or a supporter and you would like a copy of the link to the video once we've put it up it'll be on YouTube. You can look on CED's YouTube page or on our website. So it'll be available shortly afterwards on through the website or YouTube. But if you'd like the link specifically sending, we'll probably send it out to all supporters and members. But if you would like to get a link, I'm thinking maybe of someone like Stephen, I'll send it to you anyway. But if anyone else would like a link, they're welcome to it. And just a reminder that our next talk will be on Monday, the 14th of December, with Steve Morris, who is not a CED member, but he's going to speak to us about rammed earth construction, which we're really looking forward to. And then in January, we have Jonathan Cox speaking on micro hydro technology. In February, Philip Tibendarana, our part-time engineer in Uganda, is going to be bringing a Ugandan perspective on development. And lastly, our CED's chair, Jonathan Appleby, will be speaking on engineering in disasters, rather than engineering disasters, which a few of us have known in the past, but that's engineering in disasters, and that will be in March. So thank you very much to everyone for joining us. If you've got any thoughts or comments on how things went on our first trial CED Tech Talk, we'd very much welcome your feedback. But thank you to everyone, and we look forward to seeing you either next week, so I think or later this week, I think we've got a training talk or a training session. But otherwise, we'll see everyone else next month.